Thank you so much for this nice introduction. And yes, Richard Allison is what is new in vitamin D topic, and based on his works, I really enjoy still in vitamin D topic, in which I am for like 20 years now. Thank you for turning out and give me more stage fear. And let's start. It's always good to reflect to founders, to people who build the foundation for vitamin D as a compound which is active or important or even therapeutical in medicine. So I have to emphasize this gentleman, Danish doctor, who, without any knowledge about vitamin D or molecular biology of that vitamin, created phototherapy lamps for treatment of lupus vulgaris, which is TBC. And he actually had a lot of success, and he was a Nobel Prize winner for medicine at that age when he was active. So that man didn't know anything about bactericidal or antimicrobial effectiveness of vitamin D. Still, he was ingenious observer, and he really gave us a great contribution in medicine. Other founders are these people who worked on in the field of experimental Rickets, and actually they gave the name to this compound that they know at that period that is working. And right now we have some newer advances, which are, I called this genomic vitamin D act, because now when we know that vitamin D, in fact, and the product of vitamin D metabolism, hormone D, is powerful, genomic, wide active compound, we are facing an era which is very exciting in terms of development, new possibilities to use hormone D or its analogs in treatment of great variety of diseases. At that point, when these people, founders of vitamin D Pragma, were working, this disease, Rickets, who ever saw this in this presentation, I don't think that we have anybody here present, because it's something which is completely, we can say, eradicated. This growth retardation, these problems in muscle and bone functionality, and above that, a lot of other health issues are not present anymore. But we are facing a lot of problems with the vitamin D deficiency in aging population, not only in children. And this vitamin D deficiency of today fashion is like maybe lower grade, but more chronic. In fact, we are over this pathology, and we are over this vitamin D pragma. Yes, vitamin D is working for this situation, and we don't have this situation anymore to face as a medical doctors. But we are in the new era, as I told you. Accumulating knowledge in and advanced technologies produced a situation that now we are very aware and very well informed about this vitamin D, hormone D pathway. And now we know that it's a group of secosteroid molecules which are transforming to each other, and at some point of that transformation we get this hormone D, this metabolite, which is the only one which is biologically active, and it has its own endocrine and autocrine effectiveness, and also paracrine effectiveness in tissues. This pathway going through kidney as endocrine gland has up regulators, phosphor, calcitonin, and PTH, and down regulators. It's hormone D itself, and also vitamin D as calcidiol, 25-hydroxy vitamin D, the most plentiful metabolite in plasma, but without almost any biological effectiveness. So now we are talking about hormone D. We have a huge misunderstanding in today's medicine about this vitamin hormone denomination and use of that denomination, and always is good to hear more about these compounds. All these contemporary molecular biologic complexities are very difficult to translate, and it's very challenging to translate to medical practice and to clinical environment. Still, we have to work on that with the best knowledge of ours. What we can say, it's summarized here about sources and metabolites that can be detected in serum. This is a precursor pathway. So we can take vitamin D by diet or by skin conversion inducted by ultraviolet sun irradiation. We can detect in serum this one, which is vitamin D, cholecalciferol. We can detect, and usually we use this one to estimate vitamin D level or supply, because it has the longest half-life. And we can also detect this one, hormone D, in serum, but it's rarely in clinical use because it's very tightly controlled by feedback mechanisms and has very short half-life. 1 century after discovery of vitamin D, public medicine, public health initiatives, starting of supplementation, we are having this as epidemiological picture of vitamin D deficiency, if defined by 25-hydroxy deficiency. Why is that? Why do we have such huge number of vitamin deficient people, including pregnant women in the world? That's because until 2011, we had the recommendation to supplement people with 400 units daily. It's not enough. Obviously, it's not enough. Another reason is that 25-hydroxy is every minute, every second withdrawn from circulation and used in tissues in kidneys. So like glucose utilization from serum, vitamin D is all the time used from circulation for further transformation into a product which is highly biologically active. And also what is very important, this is not the only thing that is important. We measure this one, but it's not enough to establish our knowledge about vitamin D sufficiency or insufficiency. And we have to work with that in the future, and I expect to have more clue about that in next decades. And also, pregnant women always present and vitamin D deficient, while at the same time, if you measure their hormone D, they are not deficient. In fact, they are having very high hormone D in circulation, due to continual and very active placental conversion of 25-hydroxy into hormone D. Today, we are facing that almost every medical state or disease can be related to vitamin D deficiency. Does it stand as a correct hypothesis? Nobody can say. Yet, we have some clues. If we talk about findings of relative risk of occurrence of some diseases, there are some clues about relationships. For some medical states weaker, for some medical states this relationship is more solid. But if we are talking about results of interventional studies assessing interventional adding of vitamin D in terms of treatment, not much is new in that field. And the latest recommendation from 2019 is like this, coming from this respectable article. So vitamin D is important, but we are not still aware how important it is and how to use it and how to provide its best effectiveness in health and disease. We are on a good way. A lot of research is in that field going on, but we have to be realistic for this time being. This is like summary of diseases which are at the strongest way related to vitamin D deficiency. And surprisingly, look at the average US and Canadian population average vitamin D or 25-hydroxy level, and look what is the reality from evidence-based medicine. What do we need to achieve to get the most biological benefit from this compound? We are a little far away in terms of what we are supposed to achieve and what we can achieve with supplementation like that. I would like to show you this, I think, very illustrative and very clear scheme about what we are talking if we are talking about 25-hydroxy and diet of cholecalciferol or sun production induced cholecalciferol. We are talking about the peak, a smaller part of iceberg. The majority of vitamin D metabolism, vitamin D effectiveness, vitamin D importance is under the surface of this imaginable water line. And this part is not measurable because tissue activity is not measurable. We cannot assess tissue activity. There are some attempts, but it's not measurable. Simply, it's not measurable. When we measure something, when we estimate vitamin D, we estimate smaller part of this powerful endocrinological weapon in our physiology. So every steroid hormone, especially vitamin D and few of these important players in physiology, human physiology, every one of these has its own receptor. Receptor is a nuclear receptor type and its transcriptional factor. What does it mean? Upon binding ligand to receptor, it's a start of some technology which is very, very sophisticated. It consists of chromatin remodeling, epigenetic modulation, recycling of receptor, and finally gene transcription. So what do you think? Can we modulate this only by exogenous intake of vitamin D? I think no. Very specific binding process is going on when a ligand, like a natural ligand, hormone D, is bind to its receptor. it has to connect to this receptor in a stereo-specific way, so a tri-dimensional way in order to get activity. And there are a few thousands of target sites in genome which are affected. Some say 27,000 target sites. So can you imagine how powerful this compound is and how powerful it can be? It's far beyond the calcium metabolism or bone remodeling. What is very important, why I'm always moving here around the Vdr, because without Vdr, we don't have a vitamin D or hormone D activity. That's clear. So another complexity in this activity of hormone D, and what is very important is that Vdr can be very, has many variants which can influence its reactivity, responsiveness, and ultimately gene expression and transcription. Vdr receptor for vitamin D, we are still talking about vitamin D even though it's a hormone D receptor, but okay, it's good and it's widely used in medical science, and we have to appreciate these founders of vitamin D in that way, and I think it's correct. So Vdr is very highly and widely distributed in human body. There is no tissue without Vdr, maybe cornea or something like that. So every tissue can respond to vitamin D, hormone D. And also vitamin D, hormone D is strong and powerful neurosteroid and very present in brain cells and surrounding tissues, but it would require quite distinct lecture. It's very complicated area. This is another player from the group of nuclear receptors which can affect hormone D effectiveness and utilization and responsiveness. It's that receptor that can react with some external molecules and upregulate enzymes which are actually degrading vitamin D and hormone D. So activity of this receptor can decrease substantially reactivity and power of hormone D in our body. Also, presence of biofilm microorganisms are related to lower vitamin D receptor activity, and disruption of our natural protective gut biofilm can also affect reactivity to vitamin D. And not to mention, there are thousands of external molecules which can act as antagonists of vitamin D receptor. Some pesticides, air pollution compounds, antimicrobial agents, etc., etc. So it's a surprise that vitamin D is still active in our body if we think how it can be affected in so many ways. Gene activation has three phases if it is mediated by any gene activating compound like vitamin D. Also, 3 phases until you get active transcription, and in each of these phases ligand and receptor cooperate with the regulatory proteins, different regulatory proteins. It is like that to ensure most precise of this process and not to make mistakes. Epigenetics is a wide space of variations of chromatin proteins which can be in particularly activated with hormones, with stress, other environmental actions in order to produce short-lasting gene expression, short-lasting activities of some genes. And vitamin D can unlock this chromatin and produce short-lasting effectiveness. This is something which is under investigation in terms of therapeutic approach in hormone D use. There are a few groups of genes which are always up or down regulated with any impulse of hormone D release. These are primary target genes. All of them related to essential things related to immunity, cell growth, and differentiation. And some studies which were studying by chromatography what are the reactions, changes of expression of these primary target genes upon vitamin D supplementation showed us that it's not, this reaction is highly individual. Even though these genes are primary target genes, so it means always attached, always reacting to any push by hormone D, still in participants in that study, upon supplementation with vitamin D, very few of them had some similar pattern of reactivity. So even though we are supplementing in the same way, people with the same level of serum vitamin D, we cannot get the same reaction. So responsiveness to hormone D is highly individual, and the more we know, the more we are assured that it's very difficult to estimate real vitamin D status and real vitamin D importance in person particular. So blanket supplementation or wide supplementation without any idea is not recommended. So what we are facing right now? We are facing that we have a relationship with the vitamin D deficiency, which is in fact less biological effectiveness of hormone D. There are a few reasons for that. First, second, and third. So many levels of vitamin D deficiency. If we are talking about overall deficiency, we're not just talking about lack of 25-hydroxy, because it's not so important, as you saw. Right now, since we have these multiple levels of deficiency, speaking about precursor, prehormone, and receptor, we have a lot of ways to activate vitamin D receptor to get more biological benefit. And now we have Vdr Agonists. These are a class of new drugs which are produced, synthesized in order to get better vitamin D receptor activation, or more potent vitamin D receptor activation, in order to treat some diseases. Because if we use only calcitriol or more vitamin D as precursor compound, we cannot achieve tissue selectivity and tissue level, which is important. To get more about this idea, how important VDR is, VDR knockout mice, so mice without VDR, have extremely high hormone D level, which is high, that is supposed to be good, but it's not reactive because it has no receptor. And there are a lot of diseases like autoimmune disease, and here is one sample of Crohn's disease patients who have a very highly active and inflammatory disease, yet they didn't have hormone D deficiency. They had high hormone D, still very active disease. So even though this compound can act as anti-inflammatory, without proper activation of receptor, it cannot work. And also there are findings that if we have a low 25-hydroxy, probably we will have a normal hormone D level, and if we have a low vitamin D in terms of 25-hydroxy. If person is sick, we will have very elevated hormone D, but without proper effectiveness. Another layer of complexity in this process is posed by vitamin D binding protein, the major carrier of these compounds in serum. Because with the contemporary knowledge that vitamin D binding protein has a lot of variants, we are aware that we have to measure also non-vitamin D binding protein free vitamin D in order to get better insight into responsiveness and abilities of vitamin D that we are talking about. So after 100 years after first works in vitamin D field, we are sure about these few things. We can debate about this if you are not convinced. And right now we are in era of creation of vitamin D analogs, which are created with the purpose to maintain biological benefits in terms of cell cycle, cell growth, and immunomodulatory effectiveness and anti-inflammatory effectiveness, and at the same time with the lower calcium increasing capacity. And we have a lot of these compounds in the market, and a lot of these are in the pipeline. So use of vitamin D receptor agonist changed the fate of chronic kidney failure patients, both under program of dialysis or in earlier stage or less severe stage of chronic renal failure. So after introduction of calcitriol, for example, as a first synthetic VDR in treatment of renal bone disease, their survival dramatically increased. And it's not only because correct treatment of secondary hyperparathyroidism. It's due to anti-inflammatory actions in blood vessel walls, also effectiveness in terms of anti-proliferation of smooth muscle cells in vessel walls, and also in correction of anemia. And now, for example, compare the safety of first VDR in use in secondary hyperparathyroidism and this newer one, which is widely used in treatment of this state. Obviously between the 1970s and nowadays we have VDR which are very effective and very safe in terms of this disease. If we are talking about osteoporosis, vitamin D is essential, as we know from Rickets, for building mineralization and growth of bone. And what is very important is that vitamin D is acting not only as endocrine hormone in bone biology, but also in autocrine and paracrine manner, because almost every cell in bone can produce and react to vitamin D. So it's not the surprise that Vdr Agonist use in people receiving high dose of prednisone. And as you probably know, when you start to use long-term corticosteroids, 100% you are going to get osteoporosis, because corticosteroids, as they have their anti-inflammatory effectiveness, they have a detrimental effect on bones. They are putting osteoblasts to sleep, and they are burning osteoclast cell class, which is responsible for bone destruction. And if VDR agonist can reverse in positive way after 2 years of treatment, after 1 year of treatment, this detrimental effect of prednisolone, high dose prednisolone, can you imagine how powerful they are if they can antagonize prednisolone effects on bone cells and produce positive effect at the end of a year of use? And also what is very important is that cortical bone in some other study which used the treatment for osteoporosis plus placebo or alpha calcidol, which is Vdr Agonist, it produced bone mineral density increase in this cortical bone, which is traditionally very low in reactivity to any kind of treatment. So by adding Vdr agonist on top of anti-osteoporotic treatment, you can get very, very huge increase in bone mineral mass. Also, there are a few trials who showed that adding Vdr, like this one, to standard treatment for osteoporosis can produce significant reduce of incidence of fractures, significant increase in bone mineral mass in females and in males. Vdr agonists are in use in autoimmune diseases also. Just a short recapitulation, what is the problem in autoimmune diseases? This is the problem. So it starts from presented to our dendritic cells as non-self. So it starts cascade of fighting against our own tissues with the result as cell death at the end. And if we look at the effectiveness of vitamin D, I mean hormone D, in innate and adaptive immunity, we will see that this compound, this hormone, is given to us by nature to enhance antimicrobial effectiveness and antimicrobial fight, and to regulate in positive, in a good manner, adaptive immune response. So we should use this definitely. When we speak about pathogenesis of rheumatoid arthritis, we have a problem with the dendritic cells seeing our synovial tissue as non-self, and all that starts to produce a lot of cytokines and other compounds which are making panus tissue, which is destructive, like tumor is destructive in our body. We are very aware of this, that rheumatoid arthritis onset, severity, and progression is high in winter and spring, and is related to vitamin D deficiency also. This is one of large-scale studies in which personally I participated, which gave new evidence that vitamin D deficiency is highly prevalent in rheumatoid arthritis, related with all indices of rheumatoid arthritis activity, disability, quality of life, and we created by these results the PRO questionnaire, which is some self-assessment about vitamin D status, and it's proved to be valid, as it correlated very well with the actual 25-hydroxy levels. This is one study, also by my group, which showed that Vdr alpha calcidol can act as an immunomodulator in cell lines, peripheral blood mononuclear cells, and without conversion to calcitriol, to hormone D. It acts but by itself in immunomodulation, enhancing regulatory cytokines and decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines. So at the end, in clinical practice, it reduces disease activity in rheumatoid arthritis patients, and it's compared to effectiveness of, for example, corticosteroid effectiveness. Also, this VDR can significantly lower serum interleukin 6, which is one of promoters of chronic inflammation in rheumatoid arthritis. When we are talking about psoriasis, another disease of autoimmune specter, it is also something which has highly activated pro-inflammatory cytokines. But in psoriasis, we also have very powerful Vdr agonist for topical use in combination with corticosteroid, and it's significantly improved treatment with this disease and outcomes in this disease, in particular in less severe skin involvement. And what is the pearl is that Vdr agonists are effective, very effective in malignant diseases. For example, it's proved that they can decrease one of these, which is which I'm talking about. It's calcitriol. It can suppress inflammatory activity within malignant tissue, and what is more important, it can decrease expression of aromatase, which is very important for spreading of cancer cells. One of type of leukemia is particularly severe with very poor survival. And when the people were studying why and what are the indices for survival, less survival, VDR expression was very important. So we have a very powerful drug, which is now orphan drug. So it is like labeled as orphan drug, but it will be in the future very important added to classical anti-cancer, anti-leukemial treatments. A very powerful drug which has stronger proliferation, anti-proliferation activity, and which is very safe in terms of hypercalcemic actions, and it can be used in very good way to reduce malignant cells production in this very severe way of leukemia presentation. In terms of muscle activity, it's obvious that vitamin D, hormone D, is essential for muscles. First description of Rickets from 1645 was, this is a disease of waxy bones and flabby muscles in children. And of course, for severe deficiency, adding vitamin D is essential to retrieve full potential of growth and muscle development. And muscle cells has also cells have also VDR receptor, both in this area and also in nuclear area, and both signaling pathways through nuclear receptor or membrane receptor are essential for functioning of muscle. This membrane is related to rapid entry of calcium, and this one for other type of actions like protein synthesis. There are a lot of meta-analysis, randomized controlled trials with VDR activity in muscles, and I would emphasize this one. This one is performed in rheumatoid arthritis patients who were not vitamin D deficient, yet adding VDR agonist produced more muscle strength increase in patients taking that if they were assessed by quad muscle strength by this device. So it means that even if you are having vitamin D sufficient patients with rheumatoid arthritis, average age over 50, you can get more muscle strength by adding to their therapy some of these vitamin D receptor agonists. With aging, responsiveness to vitamin D supplementation is decreasing substantially. This is one small study, but it's proved also with larger studies that even though you supplement aging people with cholecalciferol, half of them will not get any benefit of this. And also, there is the development of sarcopenia with higher PTH. Higher PTH is antagonist for hormone D, so higher PTH means lower hormone D in some persons. So look at this relationship with lack of hormone D in aging people. Sarcopenia is their fate, and the fractures and falls, etc., etc. We will pass through this very quickly. These are some findings of mine, but we are running out of time, so we are going to end this with the people who are like your patients. There are a lot of data that athletes have a vitamin D deficiency as much as other population. Vitamin D and hormone D have a lot of impacts in muscle formation, function, metabolism through many ways. So vitamin D is not ergogenic aid, it's a biological requirement, but still there are a lot of studies with double-edged results studying effectiveness of vitamin D supplementation to muscle performance. Of course, since vitamin D, hormone D is so essential for overall health, it has many impacts to athletes' performance and well-being as well. And I would emphasize this very well, this is underlined, what few, two very well designed studies showed that vitamin D presence is essential for recovery of muscles, and it's very important for recovery of muscles in terms of acting to muscle precursor cells to get the best result in the end. So I found this article which is stating that taken overall, vitamin D in serum should be kept over 50 ng per ml in order to get the best situation for overall health and performance in athletes. So we are going to continue to D through exposure to sun, to diet supplements intake, through diet supplements intake under the newest guidance. This one is very nicely put by these people dealing with vitamin D deficiency in athletes. And Aspetar pathway is also exceptional, and I'm using it personally, and it's very good. But even though we are going to continue to use vitamin D, I would keep an eye on this development of vitamin D receptor agonist. As corticosteroid receptor agonist development, synthesis and use by these people led that they were Nobel Prize winners, I hope that during the 21st century we are going to meet new people as new Nobel Prize winners for their achievements in development and use of vitamin D receptor agonists in medicine. Even though corticosteroids proved to be quite unsafe, they are still with us, and they are changing the fate of many severely diseased people. Like a wrap up, few sentences, we can discuss about that, but I think that you are going to get some idea about what we were talking about. I will not read this because it's time consuming and not necessary. And now I am going to thank you, and I'm ready to take your questions.